Hey everyone, welcome to Amanda's Book Corner. I'm Amanda, and this is my July TBR. So as I mentioned in my previous video, my reading challenge for July is to read books that are set in Africa. And so in addition to the recommendations I had in my last video, in this one I'm going to talk about all the Africa set books that I hope to get through this month. I will warn you that this list is pretty long, and so I know I'm not going to be able to get through all of them this month, but I do want to get through maybe a third of them. That's my hope anyway. So in addition to the Africa books that I'll be mentioning in this video, there are a few other books on my TBR for July. Those ones are all arcs, and so I'm not going to mention them here, but I will be reading those as part of book tours that I'm part of. The first book on my list is called The Old Drift by Nomali Serpell. The author's from Zambia, and this book is also set in Zambia. It starts in 1904, and it follows 4 generations over a century as the country is born. It takes place in a colonial settlement called The Old Drift, and it follows 3 different families, one black, one white, and one brown, and the different ways that they interact over the course of a century. And this book just looks really interesting. It has very different characters, and it talks about the different relationships that they have with each other and conflicts that they might have with each other. And I imagine that from generation to generation that might change as well. So I've had this book on my shelf for a year or two, and I'm really excited to read it. This will probably be the first Africa book that I read this month. Next on my list is The Shadow King, and this is a different look at what went on during World War II. It's set in 1935 when Mussolini invades Ethiopia, and it focuses on the war that followed, but instead of focusing on men, it highlights the women soldiers instead. I haven't read very many books about women at war, and I've read nothing about Ethiopia being invaded, and I anticipate that this will be educational. I'll learn about something I never learned about in school, and it looks like a very interesting novel and one that might be difficult, but hopefully ultimately empowering. Another book I'm really excited to read is called A Girl is a Body of Water by Jennifer Nansubuga Makumbi. It's set in a small Ugandan village, and it follows a girl named Kirabo who is really at odds with herself. She's always been sweet and gentle-natured, but now she's starting to feel a very different, more fierce side of her growing inside. She starts talking to the local witch, and the witch says that she might have the first woman inside of her. This book incorporates Ugandan folklore, and it looks just very interesting and about womanhood and about different sides of yourself. And it's about a girl who's trying to be the best version of herself, to live up to what her family expects of her, but also to honor who she is deep down inside of her. This book looks really fascinating, and I cannot wait to read it. A book I picked up recently is called The House of Rest. It's a debut novel that's set in Kenya. It follows a girl named Aisha, and her father, a fisherman, has gone missing. So she sets out to sea in order to find her father, and along the way she encounters a lot of monsters. It looks like it's very much magical realism, or maybe just full-on fantasy, I'm not entirely sure. But it looks like a coming-of-age novel about a girl who will do anything to find her father, even standing up to scary monsters like sharks and things that are maybe more mythological. And although it's a slim novel, I do think it will pack a punch, and I look forward to reading it. So kind of what I was talking about when I mentioned The Shadow King, this book is also set during the 1930s and the wake of World War II. It follows a young boy named Jama who is half feral. His mother dies too young, and so he sets off on a journey across Africa, on foot, in search of the father he never knew. It starts off in Yemen in 1935, and he ends up going to Somalia, Djibouti, Eritrea, Sudan, Egypt, eventually to Palestine and Wales, and so it's all over the place. Technically it spans 3 different continents, although most of it is set in Eastern Africa. Black Mama Boy looks really interesting, and I'm very much looking forward to it. Also, I will say that I've had a particular interest in reading about Somalia lately. This author is Somali, and I have a few of her books on my shelf. This is just one of them. I also have another one here. This one's called The Orchard of Lost Souls. This one is set in the late 1980s, and it looks at Somalia's civil war. This book also looks at women in war. It focuses on 3 different girls. One is a 9-year-old girl who was born a refugee, another one is a widow, and another one is a female soldier. Through these 3 different girls, we get a different look at Somalia and Somalia's civil war. And again, kind of relating back to The Shadow King, I like that this one looks at women in war and how women interact with it and are affected by it. So that's 2 different books by Nadifa Mohammed that I have on my shelf. She has a 3rd one that just came out recently called The Fortune Men. That one's actually set in England, but I do hope to get that one after I've read her first 2 here. I do have one other book that's set in Somalia. It's called The Last Nomad, Coming of Age in the Somali Desert. It's by Shugri Said Sal, and I picked this up at my local bookstore. I actually found out about it after watching an interview with that bookstore with the author I just mentioned, Nadifa Mohammed, And through that one, I found out about this author and her memoir. I know next to nothing about the nomadic lifestyle, and so I think this will be a very interesting and eye-opening book. I also like that it's set in Somalia and can give a different perspective on Somalia than what I've heard before. I have read Ilhan Omar's memoir, and I really enjoyed that one. She's from Somalia, and she talks about how she grew up there and became a refugee from there. I also really like Kanan and his music, and he talks about that a lot in his songs, and so through those two perspectives, I've gotten some idea of Somalia and how it affected people of their age. And I think that reading this memoir will add to that and give a different perspective than what I've seen before. A kind of different book from what I've mentioned so far is called Tales of East Africa, Folktales from Kenya, Uganda, and Tanzania. My husband got this for me last year, and it just looks really beautiful. I'll show you some of the pictures inside of it. It has these beautiful illustrations inside to go along with the different stories in here. I've read one of the stories already, and I think there's about 20 left to go, but it looks like these are really simple stories, folktales that have been passed down for many, many years. They look more like fables, and they're divided into a few different categories, like tricksters and justice, and so I'm really excited to read this one. I'll probably read like one story per day until I get through the whole thing. That's probably about as many books as I can get through in a month, but I'll talk about some others that are on my shelf that I really think deserve some mention. One I've had for a few years is Black Leopard, Red Wolf by Marlon James. This is a fantasy book. It's based in African mythology and history, and I don't think it's set in a specific country, but it does look really fascinating. It has shape-shifting people and trackers and someone who's missing, and I've only heard great things about it. It is a long book, and it's also the first in a trilogy. Actually, the second book is already out now. It's called Moon Witch Spider King, and so now that that one's out, I'm just like, wow, I need to finally read this book so I can get that one and read that too in time for the third book in the trilogy to come out. I don't know if I'll have time to get through it this month, but if I don't, I will probably read it when I read a bunch of fantasy books later on. Another book I got recently is called In the Country of Others. This one starts off in France during World War II. It follows a French woman who falls in love with a Moroccan soldier who's fighting in the French army. After the war is over, the couple settles in Morocco and they have a few children, and it follows as this woman has a hard time being accepted into society and fitting in with the society. There are mounting tensions between the French and Moroccans, and it's hard for both of them to find their path, her as a French woman, but him as a man married to a French woman. So this book looks at what it's like to be a foreigner in a new country, and the tensions between different cultures, and coming from that culture who is considered problematic in your new country. This book definitely looks thought-provoking and deep, and I am looking forward to reading this one soon. Last year I picked up this book, The Eternal Audience of One. This one looks interesting because it's set in a bunch of different countries I haven't really read about. It's about a Rwandan guy named Seraphin, and he's living in Namibia, but then he ends up going to South Africa. I think part of it's also set in Kenya as well. And he's into music, and he's kind of like a nerd jock hybrid, and it follows as he finishes his law degree. It looks at civil war and him as a Rwandan immigrant living in different countries. Looking at the summary, it seems like it covers a lot of ground and goes into a lot of different themes with settings in the 70s and in the 90s, and so I'm not entirely sure what to expect, but I definitely am looking forward to it, and I definitely think it will be really interesting and offer a different perspective, and I'll get a chance to learn about different cultures than I have before. Glory just came out a few months ago, and it's inspired by the 2017 coup of Zimbabwe's president of 40 years. However, this one takes a perspective of a bunch of different animals instead. I admit I don't know anything about Zimbabwe and their politics or their history, but I do think it would be very interesting to learn about it through animals, maybe kind of Animal Farm-ish, but set in Zimbabwe. I'm very much intrigued, and even if I don't read it this month, I do plan to read it soon. If it doesn't make it with my Africa set books, I do have a theme of reading books related to horses coming up, so I might put it there instead because it does have a horse on the cover. Another new book is called Things They Lost, and I think it's set in Kenya. The author is Kenyan. It looks at a difficult relationship between a mother and a daughter. Ayosa is 12 years old, and she and her mother have always had difficulties in their relationship. It follows as she gets to know her mother's past, but she's also making a new friend. It's also apparently set at the intersection of the spirit world and the human one. Not sure exactly what that means, but I'm certainly intrigued. It looks like it might be a little bit magical realism. I'm not sure. I do like a touch of magic in my books, and I'm always all about family relationships, especially between women, between mother and daughter, or between sisters. I'm all about that. Speaking of family relationships, another one I want to read is called A Pure Heart. This one is set in Egypt, and it follows these two sisters. They haven't seen each other in a while, and then one of them, the one who lives in Egypt still, dies. She's killed in a suicide bombing, and it leaves her sister Rose devastated, and she returns to Cairo to uncover what her sister's life was like up to that point, and all the things that she didn't know about her sister. It's about being Muslim women in the 21st century. It's about family. It looks like it's a heavy and profound novel, maybe a little bit emotional to read, but also very much worth it. A book I got last year is called Sankofa. This is about a young woman who's, I think, living in London. After her mother dies, she decides to track down her long-lost father. She finds out that her father was involved in politics in London in the 1970s, and he is now the president, or maybe dictator, of a small African country. I'm not sure if it specifies what country he's the president of. This woman ultimately decides to track down her father, travel to Africa and find him, and it deals with race. She is mixed race, the African diaspora, and how you're defined by your parents and who you are. I also do have 3 audiobooks that I'm hoping to get to. One I'm listening to now is called Light Seekers, and it's a thriller set in Port Harcourt in Nigeria, and it follows an investigative psychologist who's trying to uncover why this crime, a murder of 3 boys, was committed the year prior. Another one I hope to get to is called And They Lived Happily Ever After. This is a romance, kind of paranormal romance that's set in South Africa. It follows a woman who is a romance writer, and when she's writing a book, she'll go to bed at night and she'll dream about the book. And if her dream changes what she'd written down, changes the plot or what the characters do, she'll wake up and find that what she's written has now changed to whatever she dreamed about. So that is a fascinating premise, and I think most writers would love to have that ability. There's also a romance with this other guy, and it looks really cute, but also fun with the fantasy element. So if I have time, I would like to read that one. So that is a lot of Africa books that I have on my shelves, including in my audiobook, and yet there's so many more books that I want to get that are on my wish list. I'll show some pictures here of some of the other books that are on my radar that I haven't picked up yet, but I do plan to pick up. They include fantasies and historical fictions and romances and thrillers. There are books by authors I've read before. There are books by authors that I have on my shelves now but haven't read yet. There's also books by authors that are new to me and I'm excited to get to know. So there's plenty of books here that I endorse. Although I haven't read any of them, they all look interesting to me, and maybe they look interesting to you too. So if you want to participate in my July reading challenge, which is a read books set in Africa, you can consider these many options that I have. If you want recommendations of books I've actually read before and you can trust my judgment, I'll link to the video that I did about that came out last week. So I hope you enjoyed this listicle video. If you did, please like, comment, and subscribe. And to make sure you don't miss any more of my videos, please ring the bell to get all my notifications. I put out about 1 or 2 videos every week, including listicles and vlogs and wrap-ups and more. So thanks for watching this video, and I hope to see you in the next one. Bye!